Yeah, that's good. Shay, you think about Sable doing closing remarks? You think it's okay?
I have no problem at
You
all.
okay? Okay.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
talked about that.
Some kind of paper with a yellow highlight to it.
So basically, I'm just going to make sure everyone speaks for their time. They're supposed to speak for how long?
No, actually 15 minutes. Stand behind us. We'll do something.
Okay.
We want this to last no longer than an hour and a half. We go a little while.
And I just feel the questions like what you question
No, we will use it on our laptop to project the QR codes. But then after that, it's getting projected on the screens here. I think I don't need laptop for it. Mine's real short. It's brief, to the point.
What's good? What you doing, bro? Huh? What you doing with it? Oh, did you get consent? No, I'm just.
And seriously, you can't mention your name several times.
What's
Last couple of days.
I called him up. Has it been a week? What's today? Is that last week? Wasn't that the 28th? Last weekend? Yeah. So I saw him last Saturday. We met up there. Yeah.
I was supposed to come. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, it's a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have the opportunity to host our esteemed guests. And we are thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to find out firsthand what this initiative is about and its importance to us and our community. I'm going to hand off the mic to Sister Nusayba Mahmood. She's going to get the program started, inshallah. Sister Nusayba Mahmood is a community organizer, human rights advocate, and along with a whole long list of services. She serves as the advisor for the Mass-Paced Dallas chapter and steering committee member for Mabel NTX, which is this particular initiative. So without further ado, inshallah, I'm going to pass it over to Sister Nusayba.
Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Jazakumullah khair for making the intention and coming tonight to attend our event, Black and Muslim History, a Roadmap to Social Justice. Also, Jazakumullah khair, Masjid Allen, for hosting us and getting everything prepared. My name is Nusayba Mahmood, and I have the honor to serve at the Mabel North Texas Steering Committee and Social Justice Committee, and as your MC tonight. On those screens, you will find our QR code. Please open your cell phone camera, scan it, and click on the pop-up link. It prompts you to our Instagram and Facebook pages. Please follow us to learn more about Mabel and our future events. And if you are interested in volunteering or just staying connected, also please fill out the interest form that you will find it there as well. Without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for tonight, Sheikh Jasim McKinsey. He is the manager of skills development and livelihood program for Helping Hand for Relief and Development, with degrees from Islamic University of Medina and master's degree in theology from Vanderbilt University. He has held many positions of leadership in the Muslim community, and he is on the national board. He is a national board member of Mabel. Jazakallah khair.
So I should use this? Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Also want to thank the Allen Masjid for inviting us and allowing us to conduct this program. Tonight, we'll be discussing Muslims in antebellum and modern Muslim movements, civil rights, Reconstruction after emancipation, convict lease program, and Black codes and how they connect to the social justice challenges facing Black Americans and other racial minorities today. So I want to introduce our panelists, and then we will start the program. Starting from the right, we have Dr. Rafiq Sabir, and he is an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at Tarrant County Community College, Trinity River campus, and is the past president of the Tarrant County chapter of Texas Association of Black Personnel in Higher Education. He has degrees from LeTourneau University, Our Lady of the Lake University, a doctorate degree from Capella University. Panelist number 2 is Brother Bakwi Sabur, and he is the founder and the CEO of Huma Faith, a nonprofit group. And he is a certified U.S. chaplain, a counselor, social justice activist, and a graduate of the University of Texas, Arlington. Also a national board member of Mabel. And lastly, we have Imam Khalid Shaheed, and he is an official civil rights veteran designated by the state of Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, a professional educator and imam for over 20 years in Dallas, national board member of Mabel, imam of Taqwa Ministry, imam emeritus of Masjid al-Islam with a degree and certification from the University of Southern Mississippi, and Zaid House of Islamic Culture, Abu Dhabi, UAE, respectively. With that, inshallah, we'll ask Brother Dr. Imam Khalid. Okay, sorry. We'll ask Imam Khalid to go first, sorry.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum. I am indeed honored to be here tonight at this masjid that I love. I love this masjid. I've been coming here for a long time. I know many of the brothers, I've been knowing you for decades. I know the imam well. So alhamdulillah, thank you. And it's an honor from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor to be here with you, this lovely, beautiful community. We love you. Alhamdulillah. So we want to talk about some things in terms of history that some people are trying to expunge and others are trying to infiltrate. Things that you may not find in textbooks at schools and universities. I was doing a session with Dr. Ross, one of our Muslim brothers, who was a professor at TCU, not long ago, similar to this session. A different topic though, a different subject. And he introduced us to a book that was very interesting. This book, the name of this book is A Case for Islamic/Christian Civilizations. And according to this book, the author, what he does, he looks at Muslim history. He looks at the historic development of Muslims around the world, the Muslim diaspora. He says there's 2 points that are very interesting that he elaborates on. He says that one point is the center. He said in order to understand Muslim history and development worldwide, he says that you have to understand these 2 points. He says the first point is the center. He defines the center as areas where you have historical Islamic institutions. Opposed to that, opposite of that, he says there's an area called the edge. He said on the edge, he said these are areas where you do not have historical Islamic institutions. You have new situations and new encounters. On the edge, he gives some references. He referenced the appearance of Muslims in Indonesia and the appearance of Muslims in India. He says on the edge, you have these unconventional things going on, unconventional things that may be said and done by Muslims. I am convinced that we here in America are on the edge of the Muslim diaspora, historically on the edge, we are here in America. How do we get to the edge? Alan Austin writes in his book, Muslims in Antebellum America, he said there was close to 10 to 20 million Africans brought over here during transatlantic slavery. He said of that number, he said that 20 to 30% of them were Muslims. We know about a few of them. We know about Omar ibn Said, who wrote his autobiography. He wrote it in Arabic. He was a scholar in Africa before he was forced to come over to America. His autobiography still exists today. It exists in the Smithsonian Institute. We know about Ayyub ibn Sulaiman. Ayyub ibn Sulaiman was brought here in 1730. According to the man who purchased him, he wrote the Quran by heart 3 times between 1730 and 1733. Perhaps the first Hafiz of the Quran in America. We know about Bilali Muhammad. Bilali Muhammad was a slave in Georgia area on a large plantation. This plantation had hundreds of Muslims. He became the overseer of the slaves on this plantation. The owner of the plantation wrote about him. The owner said that this man was seen wearing a fez cap, according to the owner, a fez cap. This is in Alan Austin book, Muslims in Antebellum America. You can find all this information in that book. So the owner said he was seen wearing a fez cap, had a long top at times, and that he was seen conducting public prayer. Perhaps he was the first imam in America, perhaps. We know that he fathered Islamic literature. He wrote a book on Salat in Arabic that still exists today in Georgia State University Library. We know about Ibrahim Abdul Rahman, who was a slave in Natchez. We know about the great wealth that he came from. His family had great wealth in Africa. He came from a family with a very high degree of education. He had gone to the famed Saqqara University in the mysterious mystique Timbuktu. And this university, Saqqara University, had 25,000 students at one time. So we know that, we know about that. The Islam that these Africans brought over here was gone, lost within 1 or 2 generations, gone. The Africans, what they brought over here, they lost everything they had. They lost their religion, they lost their language, they lost their names, lost their lineage, they lost their culture. They lost their sense of self-worth, esteem. Their free will was broken. And they almost lost their humanity. According to Dr. Joe McGrew, Dr. Joe McGrew says they lost all of this because of what she calls PTSD. PTSD. Said these people experienced trauma to the extreme. They saw not just lynchings, they saw murders, they saw people burnt at the stake, they saw people mutilated, they saw people shot. They saw families that were broken up, the children were sold one way, the mother sold a different way, father sold a different way. They saw people raped, their wives raped, their girls raped, their daughters raped, their babies raped. According to her, the 1860 census showed that there was 600,000 biracial, mixed race people among the African-American population that was slaves in America. 600,000, according to the 1860 census. This was a result of sexual assault. Brothers and sisters, this is pure trauma. So Dr. Joe McGrew says this trauma became transgenerational. and establish certain social patterns among people. She says when you look at the inner cities today, she said that you see the effects of this transgenerational PTSD today. So we'll come back to that. So the religion, the Islam that was brought us by the Africans was gone. But Islam reappeared in America sometime later by way of a man named Edward Blyton. Edward W. Blyton. Edward W. Blyton was born in this part of the world in 1832. As a young kid, he had a knack. He had a gift for language, learning languages. He taught himself Spanish as a child. Freed slaves from America were sent back to West Africa and started Liberia. He was sent back to West Africa in 1850. He was trained over here to be a Presbyterian minister by the abolitionists. He was told the only monotheist religion in the world was Christianity. He goes over in West Africa and he runs into another monotheistic religion. To his surprise, he runs into Islam. Because he said he went over there to Christianize the heathens. He goes over there, he runs into Islam. He becomes so impressed with Islam. Impressed, that word's not strong enough. He became enthralled with Islam. So much so that in his book, he wrote a book, Islam, Christianity, and the Negro Race. I read that book 5 times. In his book, he extols the virtue of Islam and denigrates Christianity in his book. He spent years over there learning Arabic, mastering Arabic. He becomes the first Secretary of State of Liberia. He comes back to America 6 times. Some people say 8. He goes up and down the East Coast, teaching and touting the virtues of Islam and using Islam, according to what he says, as a model for Black people and in America and the diaspora, Black diaspora. He was the first one to use Islam in the Western world to address this transgenerational PTSD among oppressed people. The first one to use Islam for that purpose. Enjoining good, forbidding evil. He dies in 1912. Before he dies, he becomes a director of a Muslim school there in West Africa. So in 1912, he died. Shortly after his death, there were other groups to crop up in America, beginning with the Moorish Science Temple, headed by Noble Drew Ali. Noble Drew Ali was calling on Allah, said he was Muslim, did something that was unconventional in terms of Islam. But again, he was on the edge. On the edge, you have new experiences, unconventional things done. So he used Islam. He was the second one to use Islam to address the social ills that were produced by the transgenerational trauma, PTSD. He had some success because he established 30 temples and had 100,000 people in his organization. All of them called themselves Muslim. This was in 1920, 1921. 100,000 people called themselves Muslim, calling Allah to address the transgenerational PTSD that had been identified among the people of America, the African Americans here in America, Black people in America. Sometime after that, in the 1920s, you had some Ahmadiyya Muslims, a few of them to come to America. They settle in northern cities. Some Blacks in a few northern cities gravitate towards them because they were seeking refuge from the PTSD they were experiencing in America. So they gravitate towards them. They support and they are part of the Ahmadiyya movement there in different few cities in America. The Ahmadiyya changed leadership. The second leader, Ahmadiyya, start treating them like they're second-class human beings. So they leave the Ahmadiyyas and they become Sunni Muslims. You have people like Sheikh Dawood Fazl, Lady Khadija, Wali Akram, Professor Izzuddin. This is in the late 1920s. And then you had Elijah Muhammad, the teacher of, Elijah Muhammad, the teacher of Malcolm X to begin with. Elijah Muhammad and his teacher, Farad Muhammad. They appeared in America using Islam, calling Allah in unconventional ways. Unconventional. Do they say anything wrong about Islam? Yes, they say a lot of things wrong about Islam. But again, on the edge of the Muslim world, you have things that are done that's unconventional, that may be said that's unconventional. So you had Elijah Muhammad, Farad Muhammad, calling Allah to address these transgenerational PTSD and the social ills that was caused by this trauma. They produced Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Imam Wafdi Muhammad. And that legacy, they continue to use Islam to address the social ills that was produced by the transgenerational PTSD in America. So much so that it had great success, great success. They created the largest conversion in the Western world, maybe one of the largest conversions of people becoming Muslims in the world in recent centuries. I was part of that. I remember Imam Wafdi Muhammad in one session giving shahada to 50,000 people. I've seen Elijah Muhammad as well. Elijah Muhammad said a lot of wrong things, but he turned people like myself. I was in the organization under Elijah Muhammad. He turned people like myself towards Islam. Then Malcolm, Muhammad Ali, Imam Wafdi Muhammad came behind him and brought us the Sunnah, brought us the Quran, taught us how to pray, how to follow the example of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, how to be orthodox mainstream Muslims. They did all this with great success. The point I want to make is this, is that when Muslims have visibility in the inner cities, according to this history, we have great success. Great success is produced in. Our organization, Mabel, our goal is to have visibility in the inner city. We do a lot of work in Oak Cliff, not necessarily South Dallas or downtown Dallas, Oak Cliff. A lot of work down there. Right? So that's the point I want to make with my brief talk. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm not very used to being in front of a microphone. Alhamdulillah, the Imam really hit it off. And I like the term that he has used, transgenerational PTSD. So after slavery, it continued with something called the Reconstruction period. Reconstruction period is exactly what it says. Lincoln supposedly freed the slaves on January 1st, 1865, right? He at least signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But his goal was just to basically disempower the Southern or the Confederacy, disempower them, without any plan whatsoever of what would happen after the Confederacy would be defeated. So this is the starts or begins the Reconstruction period. So Reconstruction is a situation where, just think about any war that you can think of, there's destruction. So if you want to defeat your enemy,
You're going to destroy their buildings, their commerce, or whatever the case may be. So all the plantations are disabled. It's just destroyed. The crops are destroyed. Homes are destroyed, et cetera, so on and so forth. Along with this written promise to free the slaves. Y'all are free now, but you're free to go do what? Where are you going? Where are you going to live? So even though the Southerners, the white Southerners, had to figure out what they were going to do also, the freed slaves had no clue of how to live or where to live. So in this Reconstruction period, the white Southerners took advantage of the illiteracy that they created among the black people and convinced them into getting into contracts for labor. Said, well, you sign right here. I let you work for me for 7 years. I'll pay you a little something or whatever the case may be, and then you can go on about your lovely business. But the situation was that those who refused to sign a lot of times would be now considered guilty of some crime. See, even though the federal government or the North created this situation to free the slaves, they didn't take any control of these southern states. These southern states were still free to enact laws, right? So now people were getting trapped into contracts that they didn't understand, and they were still getting the cheap labor out of them. This history, one of the best resources, in my humble opinion, if you all want to catch up on history like this, it's PBS. I have a subscription to PBS, and so if you just go to the historical channels of that, you can really catch up with a lot of this. So during this period, these laws started evolving in the southern states that are targeting black people. So you got these black codes, you got laws that are specific to black people, right? Such as a black person walking the sidewalk must give way to the white person walking the sidewalk. And if they do not yield to the white person, they have now committed a crime. I'm giving an example. And now since they committed a crime, they can get arrested and go before the magistrate and get a little sentence. 5 years, 7-year sentence, or something like that. See, the 13th Amendment, after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1965, it took almost 8-9 months for the states to ratify. And then it was even the year after when all the states started adopting state constitutions to accept the 13th Amendment, that the slaves were free except duly convicted of a crime. So now the South are trumping up charges on free black people, sending them to jail, convicting them to labor. So if, for an example, someone to get arrested, go to jail because they spit in the street, it could have been as simple as that. Now they are sort of auctioned off, if you will, to a private farmer who needs cheap labor. And that's when we get into something called convict leasing. Now you're a convicted felon, and I can lease you out to a business, and that business will pay government or somebody, for your labor. And you work 7 years or whatever you're going to work. And then you may, do something that they consider is a violation. They'll add some more time onto you or whatever the case may be. The situation is that black people were free, but they never really gained freedom in this particular period through this convict leasing. I like to sort of stop right there and give some ideas of convict leasing, because convict leasing still exists. They just have given it other terms and other names. And I'd like to help us understand that. I want to give the statistics that 47% of African Americans today live in middle class. And if we know something, and a lot of us may live middle class, we know something, middle class, we struggle. You know what I'm saying? We live off credit, we got mortgages, we got debt, whatever the case may be. During this period, that's how they trapped a lot of people or convicted a lot of people or got them to do the free labor because they was in debt to someone as well. But 19.5% of African Americans today live in poverty. So almost 20% of us live in poverty, and 12.5, almost 13% of us are actually incarcerated. So that's 79% of us I just described. The other 21% are people of wealth. But we understand if we just think about it, just you think about it right there where you're at. How many Black wealthy people you know, millionaires plus? And your mind will probably go to entertainers, athletes, that kind of thing. All right, that's a Black code. I'm proposing that to you. That's a Black code with its itself. You've heard of the difference between crack cocaine and raw cocaine. Raw product cocaine carries a heavier sentence than crack cocaine. Excuse me, vice versa. Crack cocaine carries a heavier sentence than raw cocaine. Why is that? Just something to consider. But I want to talk about Texas particularly. There's a lot of states that actually compensate prisoners who do labor. And I think the highest compensation rate is about $1.53 an hour. Because they justify the $1.53 an hour because they're being housed and clothed and fed, right? Well, the state of Texas gives $0 for any kind of labor. I'm just bringing a modern day convict leasing understanding to you. What the state of Texas has implemented is something called good time. If you work, we will give you credit for some extra days towards your early release. We'll let you out early if you work, but I'm not going to give you any money whatsoever. Let's say the person got a 10-year sentence. They worked for about 4 years and they earned their early release. Now they're out on parole. They're out on parole and they're on adult supervision. And they spend 4 years on parole, but some incident happened after 4 years and they get a violation. And they can violate you for anything because trust me, it's against the rules of the Board of Pardon and Paroles if a parolee don't have an address. So it's almost against the law for a parolee to become homeless. But anyway, so what happens is that person is now returned back to prison. They snatch away the good time and they got to start back at the 4 years that they left off of. So did they get any compensation at all for the labor? What does the labor look like? The labor are in industries. Texas prison system has an industry, and Texas prison system have a lot of contracts with private entities. And all these manufacturing jobs and leather making and all that kind of stuff these people are doing for absolutely no compensation. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up to speed of what a modern day convict lease may look like. Again, the 13th Amendment freed the slaves. No one is subject to involuntary servitude unless you're duly convicted of a crime. And I think that's something that we can all wrap our minds around and that we need to actually address as a collective of people. I would like to just kind of put it out there to my brothers and sisters is that this system has a way of tricking us. It has a way of indoctrinating even people who mean well. There are people without an ounce of racism or prejudice who can actually be indoctrinated by this system. There's something in place to always cause a people to make them feel like they're better than another class of people. And we need to be careful of that. Reparations is something that is often talked about. And reparations is trying to make amends for the harms that have been done. And I think that's something as Muslims that we can, come together on and think about. Some people want reparations in the way of getting some money in their pocket or some money in their bank accounts. I'm not sure if that's the most practical way of doing it. I think reparations come by just challenging the disparities, leveling the odds, access to education. Another hidden code, I believe, is the educational system in the inner cities. The Imam has emphasized the inner cities, the educational system in the inner cities. The money comes to those school districts by way of census, right? The census brings money. Inner city is not very trusting of anybody who's representing the government walking the streets trying to count anything. Let's keep it real. So the census count it tends to be low, therefore the money doesn't get there. We believe, you might call it, some people like myself, conspiracy theorists. We believe this is by design. We really do. And so this community aligning themselves with inner city communities can start to spread and promote the education, and get people, earn trust and get people to be counted in the census and combat, situations like this. So I think that's it for me. I was going to make one reference to, the Willie Lynch theory. And I don't know if y'all have heard of that, but there was a plantation owner who gave a program to people to control Black people for the next 300 years, even though they might be free. And some of that psychology was to pit us against each other, the light skin against the dark skin, the old against the young, and the women against the children. And if you just ponder over that concept, you see a lot of that amongst us that's going on. And so this trauma is deeply inbred. It started a very, very long time ago, even prior to the slavery that we're talking about, even prior to that. When people came from England, both white and Blacks came from England to be indentured servants, right? And so it started happening then because the well-to-do white people whispered to the indentured servants who was white and sort of created a division between those white indentured servitudes and the Black indentured servitude who used to work side by side, but they created a wedge between them and caused mistrust and that kind of thing. And so that group of people and their families and generations now became those controlling people on the plantation once this other type of institution of slavery started to happen. Ali Masjid, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, I personally thank you. I'm sure I share this with the rest of the panel that you all have given us a little bit of your time just to hear from us. And it's really important, and it's exciting that you would extend this invitation to us. And so we can start bridging the gap of understanding of what these traumas have been for our people, and so that we can understand why you see what you see and know that there's something that you can join in with us to try to cure, and so that we can all do better and we can implement the justice that I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with in the way of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you, Brother Sabur, for setting on the stage a little bit, and Imam. It is certainly a delight to be among you today as we share and further our knowledge of Black history, but more importantly, how we intersect this history with that of Muslims in America through the lens of the civil rights movement and era. So late on December, not too long ago, I was asked to participate in a Black History Month panel discussion on the subject of civil rights and its intersection and importance for Muslims in America. This request came from our dear brother, Imam Shaheed, who I've known for over 20 years, so thank you, Imam. But initially, there was a slight hesitancy in my voice when we spoke, because the spring semester was about to begin, and within a very full teaching and travel agenda, I really did not want to add anything else to the plate, but I could not fix my lips to say no to the Imam. But I wanted to be certain that I had sufficient time to research and prepare notes for this audience. But sometimes, you know, you do things for the betterment of others. And so alhamdulillah, I'm here today, here tonight. Besides, what I didn't share was that I was voluntold to participate. For those that know what that word is, I was voluntold. Early on, it was mentioned that I'm an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice. I'm also the department chair of behavioral sciences, which encompasses psychology, sociology, anthropology, social work, and criminal justice. So any professor at my campus that teaches any of those subjects, they report to me. And so I must warn you that that I might ask for some class participation. So this is the class in front of me. So in my preparation for this conversation, I decided that that I would listen to a lecture, a khutbah of some sort, something that perhaps that would set the stage for guidance and understanding. And so while I was clicking through YouTube, like many of us, you know, I ran across a khutbah that was titled "Unlocking the Heart." Unlocking the Heart. This is by Imam Nouman Ali Khan. And so there was nothing in the title that suggested civil rights or Black history in America. But I soon discovered after listening that was what I needed to hear. And so in this lecture, he talked about the differences between knowledge and guidance, and how the Quran provides a foundation and an entry point for guidance. On the other hand, knowledge carries a different adaptation of intellectual growth for humans, for you and I. So perhaps our reason for coming together this evening is to stimulate some intellectual growth through a candid dialogue. So I posed the question to myself, what role did Muslims and African Americans play in the development of the civil rights movement in America? A number of developments occurred. A number of developments occurred as the civil rights movement and the emergence of a consciousness among African Americans and Muslims played in shaping this country. So, you know, from the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963 and beyond, African Americans fought for their rights as citizens, plain and simple, while Black Muslims sought to establish a separate spiritual and religious identity. Both groups often teamed together to fight institutional racism, which was key in making sure that legislation would be passed that guaranteed, thank you, brother, equal protection under the law. Collectively, civil rights activists and Black Muslims helped bring about sweeping changes that still resonate. So what sweeping changes do you ask? The civil rights movement and the emergence of Black Muslims in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s resulted in sweeping changes including, I'll just mention a few, the desegregation of the American Armed Forces, the desegregation of public facilities in our hotels and restaurants, the abolishment of literacy tests and other measures limiting voting access, the protection from discrimination in education, housing, and employment, and the ending of Jim Crow laws, as Brother Sabor had mentioned, that enforce racial segregation throughout this country, specifically the southern states. Through the political, economic, and religious activism of many Black Muslims, they raised awareness about the discrimination faced by African Americans and opened up conversations about race relations in this country. This was an important step towards creating a more diverse and inclusive nation. But I would be remiss if I did not give proper acknowledgement to Elijah Muhammad and the labor-intensive initiatives and programs that he established in the Nation of Islam. So I'm going to speak about myself for a second. So born in the midst of the civil rights movement. I know I don't look that old, right? But I was born in the midst of the civil rights movement, and I was a child of civil rights activists. I recall the names of being taught the names of many historical Black figures, mostly from my parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc. I even had the privilege of meeting a few, but at the time when I would have met them, none of them really were famous, such as the late House of Representative for the state of Georgia, John Lewis, SNCC member and activist Kwame Ture, better known as Stokely Carmichael, activist Willie Ricks, who Willie Ricks, interestingly, was the first to introduce the phrase Black Power. Stokely Carmichael is usually credited, but it was really Willie Ricks. Former Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, actor Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, and Lena Horne. Former Harvard and Princeton University professor Dr. Cornel West, and others. I actually met all of these people. I didn't know who these people were. I was a child, but I met them. So as an educator, it's important to know the names of not only our former leaders, activists, and freedom fighters, but some of our 21st century contemporaries who continue to fight for civil rights, and specifically for those in the Muslim, Arab, Asian American, and Black communities. If the following names that I'm going to mention are familiar to you, please raise your hand and continue to keep your hands raised. I told you this is going to be a class participation here, right? Some of them you may have already previously heard. So Noble Drew Ali, founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Elijah Muhammad, leader of the Nation of Islam. Yeah, just keep your hand up. Malik El-Shabazz, AKA Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. If you don't raise your hand for Muhammad Ali, something is wrong. The greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, any man worth Deen Muhammad, son of Elijah Muhammad. So the first 5 individuals were on the forefront of civil rights and activism throughout the 20th century, and their contributions should be respected and appreciated. Why? Why? Okay. So they understood the assignment that was given. They opened up the doors and took a position of leadership that was not popular and extremely dangerous. They opened doors that we are able to walk through now. And if you have not realized, they are all Muslim. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand once again. Keith Ellison, Minnesota Attorney General, former Minnesota Congressman. Andrew Carson, Indiana State Rep. He is the longest serving Muslim in Congress. Ilhan Omar, Minnesota State Rep. And Rashida Tlaib, Michigan State Rep. These last 4 are active politicians who serve at the federal level. And as of 2023, only 4 Muslim Americans have ever been elected to Congress. The first being Keith Ellison, Andrew Carson in 2008, Sister Ilhan Omar in 2019, and Sister Rashida Tlaib in 2019. There are no identified Muslims currently serving in the U.S. Senate. However, I'll give a notable mention to Mehmet Oz. Some of you may know him as Dr. Oz. Yes, he was a Senate nominee in Pennsylvania in 2022. So the names of these all-star cast members hopefully reveals that the intersection of civil rights and Black history is not just limited to the great Dr. Martin Luther King. It's not just limited to a Medgar Evers. It's not just limited to a Dr. W.B. Du Bois or Marcus Garvey or Rosa Parks. It is much greater than that. So if you did raise your hand, I give you an A. Everyone receives an A today. Alhamdulillah. There are countless historical examples of racial prejudice, discrimination, and all forms of isms and phobias that marginalized groups in this country have endured. Many of us in this space have experienced some form of racial and ethnic discrimination, or even colorism, as you had mentioned earlier. If you have not experienced any of these things, just wait until tomorrow. It will happen. But without a doubt, no group has endured more and longer than Native and African Americans in this country. American history textbooks often tell watered-down stories of the mistreatment of Native Americans and the destruction of their customs, traditions, ancestral lands, and exploitation of their culture. Textbooks often allude to romanticized relationships between Native American women and European settlers that led to peaceful discussions and treaties. In these textbooks, you may read surrounding the brutal treatment of African Americans. Many of these stories end with a happy ending, though, such as Massa. Can I say Massa? Massa, not Master. Massa Susan treated her slaves well. Massa Carney allowed his slaves to stay on the land as sharecroppers. Or Massa Northington gave property to build churches and schools. By the way, these are the names of slave owners who owned my ancestors. I started my discussion briefly addressing the question surrounding the civil rights movement and several individuals who played a critical role in shaping the history of this country. But if I may move us back to a brief historical timeline that takes us from 1491 to 1776, we could start this discussion with the transatlantic slave trade. Lasted for approximately 350 years. Some scholars even suggested that it lasted roughly 400 years. But nearly 12.5 million Africans were trafficked to North and South America and the Caribbean. Roughly 450,000 of the 12.5 million survived and were enslaved here in this country. One little known fact is that nearly 5 million of the 12.5 million Africans landed in Brazil. Another known fact, Congress voted to abolish the slave trade in 1807, and they made it a capital crime, punishable by death in 1820. However, there was a little yacht, the little speed yacht they called the Wanderer. He left, the yacht left the shores of Charleston, South Carolina on July 4th, 1858, and it returned to Jekyll Island, Georgia on November 28th, 1858, with 400 Africans. It is reported that 70 died during the voyage. But I thought that it was outlawed in 1807 and 1820, but by 1858, they're still bringing Africans here. So research indicates that most of the enslaved Africans were Muslim or believed in monotheistic ideologies. However, none of these Africans were considered human and were deemed as property. Thus, they were not granted civil or human rights. By 1776, the discourse between the British rule and the American colonies grew to a harsh reality of power and control by King George. And this harsh reality meant that America would succumb to the wishes of the king. The Declaration of Independence, or as I have heard it referenced, the birth certificate of America, did not enlist the care and consideration of any religious or minority ethnic group other than European Catholics, come on, give me my card, and white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. This means I got 5 minutes, but y'all hear me. I'm gonna make it through this. June 8th, 1776, Congress decided to move forward with a declaration of separation or independence from England, and by July 4th, 1776, Congress voted to pass the declaration, authored by Thomas Jefferson, who would later become the third US president following John Adams and George Washington. Interestingly, roughly 25%, this is something that I know I didn't remember reading and they didn't tell us in school, but roughly 20% of the initial draft was never accepted. It included denouncing slavery. Thomas Jefferson may have struggled with the institution of slavery in America, but his colleagues did not. And therefore, talks of denouncing slavery would never make the final draft. Nevertheless, the Declaration did address the following three things. People have certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal, number two. And number three, individuals have a civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and others. For Muslims, these three focal points and ideas were actually established over 1,400 years ago with our prophet, peace be upon him. And as a matter of historical significance, Thomas Jefferson possessed a copy of the Quran, if you didn't know this. It is believed that the Quran had a significant influence on his writings and perhaps the Declaration. The Quran that he owned was a 2-volume set that was printed in London in the year 1764, and it was purchased by the Library of Congress shortly after he died in 1826. Perhaps there was some unspoken Quranic inspiration that Thomas Jefferson had. I don't know. Many of us may agree that the notion that individuals have a civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and others, and it's extremely important in addressing how we have arrived to these conversations surrounding civil rights and the intersection of Muslims and Black history. The signing of the Voting Rights Act on April 6, 1965, and the Civil Rights Act on July 2nd, 1964 were indeed monumental legal victories on paper. But how did we arrive at these historical occasions? I'm going to jump over some of my notes here because I don't want to get another one of these that say one minute. Dr. King mentioned that there are four institutions that are in a prime position to liberate Black America. He said the Black church, the Black media, Black fraternities and sororities, and Black professional businesses and organizations. He happened to be a member of all four of these institutions, but the latter is often forgotten in many of our discussions. There were four key professional organizations that organized and fought for civil rights and justice when other institutions and groups dared not to do it. These four are the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, known as SCLC, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC. If you get an opportunity or choose to take the time, please do some additional research on these organizations as it pertains to civil rights. I'm going to jump one more time because this is really important here. And I think this is something that we all may be able to identify with here. So September 11, 2001, nearly all American liberties were under arrest, specifically Muslims, Arabs, Sikhs, and Asian Americans. 10 days after the September attacks, Congress passed a 342-page law known as the USA Patriot Act. It was signed by President George W. Bush. The passing of the act created a never-before department known as Homeland Security, which now has 24 law enforcement agencies underneath it. For a great number of Muslims worldwide, Sikhs and Asian Americans, restrictions were placed and put in place, such as domestic and international flight bans, and individuals who rented certain library books were all under a watchful eye. Mosques and temples around the country were under surveillance. I would say that they probably still are, which has been well documented and acknowledged by federal government officials. It is my belief that as Muslims in America, we continue to support our representatives at the local, state, and federal levels, such as State Rep Ilhan Omar, and understand that there is a lot of legislation that is coming that many of us are not familiar with, but please take the time to do some research and perhaps you may be pleased. So I'm prayerful that I made some imprint on your minds to further your own knowledge and understanding of Black history and the impact of the civil rights movement for all of us. My charge to you is to continue to seek and desire civil rights for all and to have a thirst for knowledge. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was instructed by the angel Gabriel to read, Iqra, read, O prophet, in the name of your Lord who created. That obligation extends to all of us as a means to seek knowledge, as a means to seek truth, understanding, and guidance wherever it is. So I ask Allah that as a ummah, we bring guidance and knowledge to close the gaps of misinformation that often hovers over this month, that we refer to as Black History Month, and to understand that Black is simply not a color, but it's an adjective, it's an adverb, and a noun. Thank you very much for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan to our panelists, mashallah, very, very informative session. And we have a few minutes for some questions, but I wanted to just state one fact that I think will add some value to and some context to what was said today. And starting with Imam Khalid Shahid, he mentioned transgenerational trauma. Many people think, this was a long time ago. This is post-racial America. Let's move on. But I'll just mention one fact that indicate that this wasn't so long ago. The National Civil Rights Museum that was opened by Barack Obama, it was inaugurated. The lady who rung the bell was named Ruth Boner, I believe. She passed away. Passed away around 100 years old. She was the daughter of a slave. You're saying, how can that be? Just look that up. The lady during the presidency of Barack Obama who rang the bell was, and I'm not saying granddaughter or great-granddaughter, the daughter of a slave. So this is not very far away. This is not far at all. But yeah, look that up, inshallah. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and open the floor. We'll start with the sisters, if there's any questions that you would like to ask. Yes. Great, great, great. So, Dr. Sabir.
No, go for it.
So,
So he passed passed on to me. Sister, you're exactly right. There were, before the Civil Rights Act of 1968, it was immigration law of 1960. That law was enacted. There was two other laws, 1917 Immigration Act and 1924 Immigration Act. Both of those based on discrimination. They allow Western Europeans to come here, but not dark-skinned people and not Muslims to come. The Civil Rights Act, there are a lot of people died to change, including Dr. King and many more you never heard of. Vernon Dahmer, whose house was blown up. Others who died. They, because of their activities, they changed America in that they helped produce the new Civil Rights Act, which struck down any discrimination, including discrimination in the immigration laws of America. So when the immigration laws of America changed, that allowed people to migrate from Pakistan, from India, from the Arab world. I remember in the 70s when one or two Pakistani families first came to America, came to our masjid. Our masjid was like the Ansars. Ansars in the sense that we welcomed them, we provided a religious home for them, back in the 70s. But the Civil Rights Act struck down any discrimination, including discrimination that was in the immigration laws, which allowed people to come from the Muslim world. So that's a very good point. Thank you, sister.
brothers, yes.
Assalamu alaikum. We see this a lot. I want to try to just help provide some understanding. I'm not saying I have any specific answer for that specific situation or anything like that. As Muslims, we desire what's best. We desire what's best for ourselves. What's happening when you have, say, suburbia, inner city, or immigrants or descendants of immigrants, I mean, it's inner city, that kind of thing. The clash is what's on our agenda. And I think the panel kind of spoke about that when the panel was talking about some historical figures who was branding Islam, but it wasn't quite accurate or on the Sunnah or something like that. So what happens if people come into communities and whatever's on the agenda is not quite meeting the objectives of the inner city, then there might just not be a compatibility there. Meaning that scholarship, Islamic scholarship, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, you know, Muslims, especially Muslim leaders, you know, we need Islamic scholarship, et cetera, so on and so forth. But if you're gonna come in a city where we're just combating to get food on the table, or to get some rights or not get beat up by the police, we hear that. Yeah, Islamic scholarship, but at the same time, we trying to get the police off our necks. You kind of see what I'm saying? The agenda has a tendency to be a little different. And so if people are not coming into that inner city, kind of speaking to those agendas, then there's no common plate, or so to speak. And just take that in consideration, because I think that's what happens a lot of the time. Again, I'm in the prisons a lot, right? And there's a lot of prison dawah. There's a lot of prison dawah coming from the suburban communities, immigrant brothers and sisters, or the descendants thereof. And those brothers really appreciate the attention. They honestly do. Wallahi, they appreciate the attention. But, because I'm from a different neck of the woods, I get the insight but they're not speaking to our issues. You see what I'm saying? So I think if we would just try to sit down like that a little more, and I think we can have a better relationship. I'm encouraging to keep trying, but that's just a bit of advice, from my inside ear as to what's coming, what's going on, Allahu Alam. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Sisters have any? Yes.
Yes.
I'll touch on this just a little bit. The school to prison pipeline is a very interesting topic. We could probably do another one of these sessions just addressing that. And for those of us that may have children in our public schools, we have to understand kind of what the system or the institution is designed to do and who is designed to benefit from that. It was quite disturbing, and it still is, to know of governors who ban books, governors who say AP Black History, there's no place for that, and just regular old common people who say we don't want critical race theory when they can't even spell critical race theory. And so when we look at the pipeline, we have to understand that it is incumbent upon us as educators, as leaders in our religious institutions and other places, that we take control of the education, and at the very least, that we teach our children our culture, our religion, etc., so they don't assimilate as so much within that other system, because the other system is already telling you, here's the pipeline, as we say in academia, here's the pathway. And we don't want that pathway to be for our children. I work at a campus at Tarrant County College. We have 5 physical campuses and 1 virtual campus. And oftentimes when I'm talking to my students, I make reference to the other TCC, the Tarrant County Corrections, which happens to be directly across the street from the campus. Directly, literally. If I go across the street, that's a field, they call that a field trip. But it's 50 yards away from the front door of the campus. It's Tarrant County Corrections. And I often will take students there on a field trip, right? And it's always disturbing to hear when we return to the campus, a student will say, you know what, Professor? I actually saw one of my classmates. And guess the classmates look brown and black. The prison to pipeline is true. It's not a fairy tale. I wish we could spend more time on that. But thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else wanted to touch on that? No, okay.
Brothers, any question? Maybe we'll take maybe two questions. I think Sister Nuseba wanted to, it's closing remarks. Sister Nuseba had some closing remarks. So, but we'll have another question or two, and yes.
Wa alaikum salam.
So one of the things, that I think growing up and things that we struggle with, it's easy to always look at something like racism that happens in society in general. But growing up in Muslim communities in America, there's a lot that we can fix ourselves. And I think that's part of the challenge and the struggle sometimes is because of the race of Muslim that you are, you may feel intentionally or unintentionally that you need to, like you were saying, maybe it's not on your agenda, you need to push your agenda forward. It creates a lot of tension and problems, disrespect, frankly. And we all do a better job fixing that. So on that note, one or two things that, give us some books, PBS documentaries. Oh, yeah. What are one or two things that we could really focus on as an Allen community, as a greater Muslim community here in Dallas, to really make a difference? I didn't start enjoying all of you guys, but really, one or two things that we could really do with our time, with our effort to make an impact on what you guys are trying to, move forward in.
You looking at me? Well, I would just say one thing that's very easy, everyone can do, even the youngest person, is just purposely invite and get to know someone from a different ethnicity. That's so easy, but most people don't do it. From my estimation, from what I see, and everyone always complains that we need to do better, but it's always, we just hang out with our people, and that's natural. Nothing's wrong with that. So one thing is to get to know your brother and your sister intentionally. Invite them over, not just talk to them in the masjid. But when you do that, you're going to really, that simple thing, grow the brotherhood, grow the strength, and we will become a force. We just won't know somebody by name, first name, but that simple thing, I think, goes a long way. So that's something that's easy, low-hanging fruit. That's what I would share. He asked for two things, so we need one more easy thing that everyone can do and do tonight.
Definitely, you could be part of our initiative, MABLE, Muslim Alliance and Black Lives. As I said earlier, we're working in Oak Cliff. We've done a lot of things in Oak Cliff. So we welcome your participation. We really do. Let me mention this. Jewish people have gained a lot of leverage in America, especially with Black politicians. And the reason that's like that is because at one time, going back to the 60s and 50s, Jewish people were in the trenches with Black people. And they still are to a certain extent. I remember in Jackson, Mississippi, where I come from, we had Jewish people on the front line, picketing, boycotting. So much so that in 1968, there was a synagogue bombed in Mississippi because they were in the trenches with Black people. As a result of that, today, a lot of Black politicians have great allegiance to Jewish causes. Because Jewish people had that visibility with African-American people going back way a long time, decades ago. So our invitation to all of you is to become involved in this alliance. MABLE, acronym for Muslim Alliance, Black Lives. To become involved in this alliance so we have visibility in the cities. So we can maybe emulate some of the things that what the Jewish people did in terms of their involvement in the Black community.
Can I add a third?
Go ahead.
I know we asked for two. I think we should take accountability for our own prejudices. I've been Muslim over 50 years. That's my entire life. And as an African-American Muslim, oftentimes I hear, so when did you convert? I never asked, when did you become American? But that's a prejudice, and it's an assumption. And if I answer, well, depending on how I feel that day, now what? Like, where do we go from here? And so I typically use that as an educational moment to try to teach that brother or sister how we should not treat each other in that fashion. So I say that to say for us to be accountable for our own prejudices and how we do treat one another. So take accountability.
I'm sorry, a quick fourth. I'll be really
Yeah,
quick.
fourth.
Break bread. Let's break more bread with each other. You know, these little dinners and stuff like that. I mean, people gather around food, right? And see, you know, I've been a Muslim quite some time myself. And a lot of times when I'm invited to break bread and people are bringing potluck and whatnot, you know, there's a dominant culture on the food. You're just saying. Let's divide that pie a little bit, break bread, sit down and talk a little more.
Jazakumullah khair. So I'll go ahead and invite Sister Nusayba to give the talk. And again, we really appreciate your attendance and appreciate the Allen Islamic Center inviting us, and Imam Bashir Abdurrahman. I got the chance to see him, and I haven't seen him in many, many years. So that's an added benefit, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Yusuf, verse 111, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب. In their stories, there is truly a lesson for people of reason. Sadaqallah al-Azim. Jazakallah khairan everyone for attending, and I pray to Allah that this session has benefited you, taught you something new about our past, present, and moved you to seek a change for the future within yourself and your community. I'm not going to tell you again to follow us, but please follow us and fill out the interest form and check our Mabel's vision and mission on our social media platform, and reach out to us, ask us how can we offer support to your community, education opportunities, and also let us know how can we utilize your talents, your time, and your efforts in support of the cause. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
I think you guys did an excellent job. Oh, I don't know about that. No, I was struggling. Ooh. And it's I guess my child playing basketball. I keep looking for him. Where my kid at?
Hey, it's all right. Where's the first one? You got 3 more. Next is that